In this episode of Behind the Meal, I'll be talking with Jen Steele. We'll learn about her journey from volunteering at a soup kitchen in Ohio to CEO of Meals on Wheels San Francisco. Along the way, we'll discuss delivering meals to high rises, how tariffs might affect your program's bottom line, and even a little about robots. This is your host, Dave Colling. All that and more coming up right after this. Hello, and welcome to Behind the Meal. Join me as we delve into the stories behind Meals on Wheels, meeting the incredible people who make it all happen. Today, I'm so excited for the opportunity to talk to Jen Steele, CEO of Meals on Wheels San Francisco. Jen has a history of work not only with Meals on Wheels, but working on issues of food insecurity affecting people of all ages. She has been the recipient of many honors and awards for her work, and she's been an innovator when it comes to fighting for the nutritional needs and social needs of seniors. Jen sits on the board of directors for both California Meals on Wheels and Meals on Wheels America. Jen, thank you for this time, and I can't wait to talk to you about the work you're doing and the work you've done.
Yeah, I'm excited. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, can you just give us, a little bit of introduction on your background, maybe how you came to Meals on Wheels of San Francisco and
Yeah, so I've been in the Meals on Wheels network for I guess it's almost 6 years now.
okay.
I before this led the Meals on Wheels in Southwest Ohio and Northern Kentucky, and prior to that had done pretty much my whole career in the nonprofit sector. I had a brief stint in regulatory consulting in a law firm when I thought I might go to law school.
That sounds not fun.
I'm really glad I had that work experience, so I made the correct career decision.
Sure.
But otherwise, so spent my whole career in nonprofit, and a lot of it in working with people with disabilities and food
Hmm.
insecurity. So it's something I'm really passionate about, and just feel so lucky to get to do the work.
For sure. Was there something that you could point to and say, this is probably why I'm doing work in nonprofits or why you want to do work in community work, that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's I for me, it's always, I think, been a little bit of a calling. I can
Mhm.
remember being a little girl and just really caring about, other people, but also kind of macro level issues as much as a little girl can care about them.
Right.
But I remember very distinctly this one experience. My dad worked downtown in downtown Cincinnati,
Hmm.
and there was a man every time I went to his office who was on the street, asking for help, and I always wanted my dad to give him a little bit of change. I always was really curious about his story. I wanted to talk to him. I wanted to understand all of it. It really troubled me, and so my dad took me to a soup kitchen, and I decided I wanted to be a social worker. And I had a little bit of bobs and weaves, but ended up, getting my bachelor's in social work and my master's in
Okay.
public administration ultimately, and here I am. Yeah.
Oh, that sounds great. That's a good story. I think I think a lot of folks that I've talked to are similar,
Yeah.
and there's always that point to that one time that they saw somebody or did something, or a parent, or a lot of times, obviously with Meals on Wheels, it's they were delivering meals, or
Yeah.
a grandparent was getting meals, or something along those lines. And I like to take my son out when we do deliveries whenever I can too, so he gets to
Yeah.
see
I
it.
think, that's one of the things I love the most about working at Meals on Wheels is hearing people's Meals on Wheels stories. I've often said I want to,
Hmm.
I want to write a book or to have some compilation of, you know, a really artsy kind
Hmm.
of picture book, like
Oh
coffee
yeah.
table kind of book where it's people's people's Meals on Wheels stories, because it's such a universal
Hmm.
experience. Everybody knows somebody who has benefited from Meals on Wheels, who has delivered for Meals on Wheels. They've done it. It was their first volunteer experience. It's just one of the only unifying things we have left, I feel like, in the world right now is Meals on Wheels.
Yes, it does feel that way some days. On that note, you came from Meals on Wheels, and was it Northern Ohio or Northern Kentucky, Ohio, right? Is that the
Yeah.
um, uh, what do you see? Obviously, there's a lot of similarities, but what are some of the differences coming from, Ohio to California,
There are a few.
Cincinnati to San Francisco?
Well, we have this the saying in the network, if you've seen one Meals on Wheels, you've seen one Meals on Wheels, because
Exactly.
we're all so different. But I imagine the difference between, Cincinnati, Ohio, and Northern Kentucky, which Cincinnati's a mid-sized city, of course,
Hmm.
but we served in that area a pretty wide geographic swath. So it was urban, rural, and suburban seniors, and really seeing the challenges that rural seniors faced.
Hmm.
And even, suburban everybody's got their own challenges, right? But they're very distinct, and they require a little bit of a different approach, right?
For sure.
To coming to a city like San Francisco that is very densely populated. And
Hmm.
so, we were serving the same number of seniors in that, Cincinnati market as we are in San Francisco, but in San Francisco, it's just this very, very concentrated place. And
Your routes are a little different.
the routes are totally different. It blew my mind. Yes, it blew my mind. And the high-rise apartment buildings, and just the challenges of navigating parking in the city.
For sure.
And to budget for parking tickets, just it's there are a lot of things that are different, certainly politically, everything. But
Hmm.
I think, again, just there are so many universal threads with Meals on Wheels, and people are still people. And
Hmm.
seniors in San Francisco have all the same needs as people in rural Kentucky and
Sure.
in the Midwest, and they all need nutritious food. They need to be safe, and they need to be cared about. And
Right.
so it's food, it's human connection, and it's safety, and those are just human needs, right? No matter where we are, it's just how we approach them is a little bit different.
For sure. The mission hasn't necessarily
Yeah.
changed between the two organizations. It's like you said, it's that nutrition, it's that human connection,
Yeah.
the caring for people.
Yeah.
Yeah. What when you're what does your community look like there? Not necessarily just the senior community, but your community in general in San Francisco area.
I mean, it's such an interesting place. And I still feel so new. I've been in my role almost 2 years, and I'm still learning.
Sure.
I'm still learning so much, but it's the innovation heart of the country, right? Which is really what attracted me
For
to
sure.
make the move. I had lived in Cincinnati area my whole life. It was a tough decision, but ultimately I thought, oh, what a great opportunity to be in a community that's really open to new ideas and trying things different ways. And I love that. I love the creative spirit. I love the entrepreneurial spirit. I love the inclusivity that the community has. And yeah, it's a really special place. It gets a lot of hard knocks in the media, but it's beautiful and amazing, and I really love it.
I think that's why I get some hard knocks. Folks are jealous.
Yeah. Yes. That's probably true.
Well, with you mentioned the kind of the diversity of the community, is things like that. Now, does your program, your menu, your volunteers, your programming all together really kind of how does that reflect the community in San Francisco?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and that's been a really interesting difference for me too. Really, in terms of the way to approach the meal in particular, right?
Sure.
So in Ohio, there's a mandate, actually, that there be choice in the menu for Meals on Wheels. So seniors were able to choose every single meal that they received. They called and they placed an order just like you would
Like a
for,
DoorDash.
like DoorDash or something, right? From a defined menu of meals. And so they said, this is what I want. I want 7 of these, or I want, this collection of things this week. And at the scale that that organization was, Cincinnati was operating at, which was a little over 1 million meals, it was really, really challenging
Mm.
to provide that. And when I came to San Francisco, I think I had just kind of assumed that it was the same everywhere, right? That, all seniors were ordering off of a menu everywhere.
Right, right.
And when I realized, here, we're producing up to 13,000 meals a day. And just the sheer size and scale of it makes that level of choice really challenging. It presents some challenges for culturally appropriate meals, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How do you provide a truly authentic cultural meal for a client at the rate of 3 million meals a year?
Right.
And so we do our best to reflect the diversity of the people that we serve and their meal preferences. And there are some great other organizations in the city that really do kind of hone in on specific populations and those specific needs, and that's great, and we can work together. But it's challenging, and I think it's honestly it's something that we want to do more and better, because the needs of seniors also, as you know, are growing and changing. The
Mm-hmm.
population's exponentially growing, but it's also going to look very different. There are going to be many more seniors of color in the next, several decades than there are now. And how do we best meet not only the growing but the changing needs of seniors? So I think that's something I really care about, and that we're challenging ourselves to tackle in some
Sure.
different ways.
Are you doing some of those things in-house? Like when you mentioned, working with the culturally appropriate meals and the diversity of the people you're working with. Is that, some of that in-house? Are you partnering with organizations, a little bit of both?
Yeah, so
And
we
the meals
produce.
too. I mean, are you creating those meals yourself?
We are, yeah. So we produce all of our meals in-house. We're really fortunate. We have a Michelin star chef who is
Wow.
our San
Can I
Francisco.
sign
It's a
up for
foodie. It's a
meals?
foodie town. That was one of the first things that I learned. And he had been the chair of our gala, the chef chair of our big fundraising gala. That's a food and wine event
Hmm.
for like 20 years. And during COVID, when the restaurant shut down
Mm-hmm.
and the demand tripled overnight, he came to help in the kitchen, and he fell in love and he never went back. And so we have the most amazing meals that
Wow.
he produces. And it's in my first day, I was cracking up. It looks like something on a cooking show, right? Somebody walks up to him with this Meals on Wheels meal, and it's in the little tray. It's just like every
Mm-hmm.
meal that you've ever seen. And he's tasting it, and he's inspecting it, and he sends it back to the kitchen. And he takes so much pride in the quality of the food. And he told me once that he feels like he has more creative license working in our kitchen than he did in the restaurants, because he's taking these recipes maybe that were designed for a household or
Right.
number of people, and he's blowing them up to thousands. And so he's really tweaking flavor profiles, and sauces are really important, and
And
trying
then you
to
got to
meet the
watch the salt and the
nutritional
fat and
requirements.
right.
Exactly. So yeah, we are doing a lot of it in house. We really kind of specialize in that um kind of multicultural Western menu.
Okay.
And there, like I said, are a number of organizations in the city that have long histories of serving the Chinese community, the Japanese seniors, kosher meals that
Mm-hmm.
have deep experience and lived experience and knowledge with that type of cuisine. And so we want to support that work however we can and partner however we can, but know that we all kind of have our role in that ecosystem.
Of course. And I imagine, again, this is maybe my outside California bias. I don't know. It always seems like things in California cost more. That's what you always hear.
Yes.
Is
It's not a lie.
that from the Midwest to California?
Yeah,
Well, and that's always a challenge, no matter where you're
that's
at. But
it is, I mean, of course, every Meals on Wheels organization, food's going to be one of the biggest cost
oh, for sure.
centers.
Hmm.
And we do a lot with food rescue and
Oh, good.
reclaimed food. But when you're operating at scale and you have to meet specific nutrition requirements and menu requirements, it's you still have to buy. You have to buy a lot, and it's incredibly expensive right now. And of course, we're you know what impact will tariffs have, and some of the
Hmm.
other kind of macroeconomic cost pressures that we're all dealing with. It's it's really, yeah, it's really a challenge because we are so committed, of course, like we all are, to providing really nutritious, high quality food in addition
For
to
sure.
just making sure people are fed.
What I think a lot of people don't think of when you think of tariffs, you're thinking of cars and
That food
big
comes in
projects.
cans made of
There's the can,
metal.
there's labels, there's those trays, there's
Yes.
the machine parts that go into all these kitchens, and they things break.
And we deliver those meals in vehicles and
Right.
they require parts and
Oh,
maintenance. Yeah,
the wear
absolutely.
and tear on a car is
Yeah.
it can be, or vans or whatever it is you're using.
Yeah.
It adds up, and yeah, those things will definitely come down to us at some point. Obviously we talked a lot about food here and your menu and things like that. What I think folks know and understand that there's more than just the nutritional part. There's the social connection, that human connection, feeding the soul and not just the belly. What are some of the kind of any stories or anything that's kind of in San Francisco or even go back to Ohio, that kind of stand out as when we talk about social connections and seniors, or any programs
Yeah.
that you're running like that?
Yeah, I mean, this is I really believe with my whole heart that this is as important as
Hmm.
the meal, if not more important in some cases, that human connection that we provide. And of course, anybody who's spent any time in a Meals on Wheels program knows that oftentimes our drivers or volunteers are the
Right.
only people that a senior might see in a week. And so many of the seniors we serve live alone.
Right.
And so a lot of the things that I stay up at night thinking about, or the ideas that I have swirling around in my head involve how do we better address loneliness and isolation.
Hmm.
We're doing a great job of that already, but how can we do more? And how can we utilize tech to do that? Maybe, and again, that's I'm kind of like in that world quite literally right
Yeah.
now, and
Yeah. You're in the
and
heart
I
of it.
think there's so many cool things that I think once the technology becomes a little more accessible and affordable, like with AR and VR,
Hmm.
that could, if a senior could be homebound, bedbound even, right? Put on a pair of goggles and take a trip with other seniors to Italy without leaving their bed or their home. Like it's still human connection, but it's a little bit different than the way we've always thought about it. And I think that there's a lot of interesting applications of AI and fundraising. Like there's just a lot we could be doing in that tech
Hmm.
space that I think is just really kind of untapped. We were chatting before the podcast about the robot pets. We've launched that. We did that in Cincinnati. We've launched that in San Francisco and the kind of some of the surrounding communities. And it's
And I
amazing.
would suggest people look that up.
It's
It's
amazing. These
a great. There's some great
animatronic
news stories.
pets.
Yeah.
Yeah, you forget pretty quickly that it's not real. And it's still a a thing that's responding to your voice and to your touch. And
Hmm.
it's filling a need for sure. Um, But there's nothing like that human in-person connection that is the cornerstone of what Meals on Wheels provides. I think at the end of the day, back in Cincinnati, one of the most, I think, profound experiences that I've had, even, as a social worker, even. So I was out delivering meals. We were actually having a little bit of a logistics challenge, and I wanted to go out and drive a route and kind of get my head around what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And, um, you know, uh, bless the hearts of all of our ops folks back there. Anytime I wanted to go out, they were like, "Oh, great."
The boss is going out. Everybody
That
clean up
route
your
is not going to
cars.
be on time today. I like to chat. So,
Find some extra
so I
volunteers.
visited the home of a woman, and it had been the woman and her husband who had been receiving our meals. And the husband had just recently passed away.
Mm.
And she invited me inside, and I saw in their living room, they had, a couch on the right, and then straight ahead, there were these two recliners. And of course, one had been his and
Sure.
one was hers, and we were standing there in the living room talking, and she kept glancing over at the recliners, and I could tell she wanted to keep talking. She hadn't taken the
Yeah.
meal from me yet. And I said, would you like to sit? Would you like for me to sit and talk with you for a while? And just tears sprang
Mm.
into her eyes, and she couldn't even speak. She just nodded yes. And when she went to take the meals, she just held on to my hand, and we sat on the couch. I don't think she could have bared to sit in the chair. And then she told me all about her husband. They had been married for decades. He was the love of her life. She was so lonely now. She didn't know what she was going to do without him. And she really needed that
Just
from,
getting that out. I'm sure it's been in her. And
yeah. And to know that someone was going to show up there every week for her that way.
mm-hmm.
And that we would check on her, and she could call us if she needed anything. It,
Right.
it, it just means everything. It just means everything. And that's what, what we like to say in San Francisco is nourishing the whole person. And I think that is such a great example of that. It's so much more than the meal. It really is.
It, for your volunteers, I just made me think about, so sometimes it can be difficult to find volunteers, and it changes from program to program, really. Uh, uh, what are some of your sources or some of your ways you're finding your volunteers? Are you training volunteers after you get them? What kind of process? Is there levels as well, maybe?
Yeah, that's a great question. We are not using volunteers as drivers in our program
Okay.
right now. We did in Cincinnati in some cases after they had been background checked and
Mm-hmm.
trained and
Mm-hmm.
vetted, especially during the COVID days. That was
Yes,
that was essential. And
for
what was
sure.
so interesting there is we had started with a very small handful of volunteers. I think maybe 25, like really small number of
Mm-hmm.
volunteers. And it was kind of this consistent group that came and helped pack boxes. And we're just so lucky to have timed a planned expansion and build out of our volunteer program with the shutdown of the world. And
Right.
so when all these people came out of the woodwork and wanted to help, we were able to do it, and actually had a really cool initiative that was featured by Fast Company called Volunteer from Your Couch, where
Hmm.
we used an auto dialer that was used for political campaigns. We had some people who were in the mayor's office were shut down at the time and
Putting
said,
that stuff to good use.
yeah, well, use it for good and not evil, right? And we had volunteers from all across the country, um, just auto dialing and calling seniors. We pulled voter records for anybody over the age of 70, loaded them into the
Mm.
auto dialer, and just said, "Hey, this is so and so for Meals on Wheels. We're just calling to check on you." And we did the 2-question food insecurity screener from the USDA, or three, the
Mm-hmm.
short form. And people loved it. They loved getting those phone calls. The volunteers loved making them. And then, we kind of expanded the program from there. Um, in San Francisco, it's it's harder. We ended up with like 2,000 volunteers in Cincinnati, and I'd hear people talk about the challenges of Meals on Wheels programs getting volunteers, and I was like, "Well, we're not having any trouble." And I get it now.
Sure.
I get it now. It's a lot easier when you have ample parking for your volunteers to pull into, and
Little things make a difference.
it's a big difference. But we do have a really committed group of volunteers that works in a program we partner with our local food bank on, which is a home delivered groceries program.
Hmm.
That's a really great core group of volunteers.
Hmm.
We've done some, family volunteer days where we've got volunteers with little kids, which honestly has been a great engagement opportunity
I bet.
because, historically the volunteer base for Meals on Wheels programs has skewed older.
Yeah,
And
the people getting the meals and people delivering the meals sometimes it's about the same age.
exactly right. And I believe, and this is anecdotal, but it's in part because when you're young, you don't think it's ever going to happen to you, right?
Right.
You just can't get your head around that. That's if you're lucky that's all of us one day,
For
right?
sure. For
And
sure.
so this was a great way to expose kids and younger adults to the mission, and so the important ways that they can help. And so I think it's the volunteer engagement is critically important, but it is hard work. I mean,
Hmm.
it is really hard work. And I think, especially if we're utilizing volunteers in any capacity where they're interacting directly with clients, that screening and that training is critically important.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it was during COVID with the program I'm with here in Minnesota. It was, it was interesting talking about the age of our volunteers. Of course, the volunteers were locked down too, because they were all
Absolutely.
in their 60s and 70s or more. And so
Absolutely.
we saw a large influx of younger volunteers during that time period, which has been great because some of them have stayed around.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and really it's been great to, like you say, when they're visiting those seniors. I think it makes for a great interaction of the generational
Abs
piece.
Absolutely agree.
Yeah.
Absolutely agree. I think there's so much more we can do in terms of multi-generational approaches,
Hmm.
in general. That's something I think about a lot.
Well, and this, those visits too. They sometimes those visits can catch things before they are, before things get out of hand, as
Absolutely.
we all know. Maybe not in San Francisco, but of course in Ohio and here in Minnesota. In the winter, is your heat working? Is the air conditioning working? Those
Yeah.
kinds of things in the summer, and
Yeah. Well, and that's an interesting thing that I've observed, in San Francisco as well, that most of the buildings, and this blew my mind coming from the Midwest, right? That with when August brings 90 some degrees and 100%
right,
humidity,
the
and
humidity.
no one has air conditioning here
Hmm,
because historically they have not needed it. They haven't had these days where it's gotten extraordinarily hot. And now we do have those days.
mm,
And so there were a number of days last summer where we really, really worried about the seniors, especially who were living in upper floors of high-rise buildings, and the heat was really dangerous.
sure.
And no one has air conditioning. No one. A lot of people don't even have a fan.
That kind of blows my mind.
Mine
I can't
too.
imagine that, but I'm sure
Mine
it's
too.
whatever works or whatever used to work. I think
Well,
things are
right. And I think
changing.
it's just one more example of how I think Meals on Wheels programs are having to adapt to changing conditions, right?
Sure.
Including environmental conditions. Um, you know, we we were called on a number of times, and I know this has happened to Meals on Wheels programs all across the country, including San Francisco, to respond in climate related emergencies, floods, earthquakes,
Yeah.
hurricanes, other, tornadoes, other kinds of disasters. And I think it's just such a really interesting application of our model because, we're able to produce these individual meals that, can be heated easily if you have a generator and a heat, I mean, you can make it happen
Right.
like in the field, right? I mean,
Right.
it's almost like an MRE kind of situation in
Exactly.
the military. And so I think that's just a really interesting way that Meals on Wheels helps the larger community and nation, in addition to that direct one-on-one impact with the seniors that we're serving in those apartments on the 30th
Hmm.
floor.
Right. It kind of reminds me too. Do you have what kind of relationships do you have with like government officials or government entities, city, county, federal? I mean, partnerships that you work with there, I imagine, are pretty important.
They're really, really important. Yeah. I mean, that's of course one of the great things about the Meals on Wheels model. I know not all Meals on Wheels work with government funding. But when they do, Meals on Wheels is a really effective public-private partnership, one of the most effective in history, one of the longest standing. And so when that's good, it's really good.
Right.
It's we have great relationships at the level of the city. We receive funding from the city, state of California, of course, and then the Older Americans Act at the federal level, and it's really critically important. We fundraise a significant amount of money in San Francisco. We're really fortunate to be able to do that. Not all Meals on Wheels across the country
Right.
have that opportunity, but that city, that local, state, and federal money is yeah, it's really important, and it's scary when it's at risk. I mean, it's it's the uncertainty that we're dealing with now is really troubling.
Well, it feels like it's been that way for about 5 years now. Where it's really
Yeah.
just everything is changing quickly, and it's for
Which
one reason or
generally,
another.
Dave, I love. Like,
Right. No, I
I
do
love
too.
when things change quickly, but when you can't see your hand in front of your face.
Well, for sure. It's this. I don't even want to say post COVID. It's not. I mean, I don't know what it is anymore. Um, but we came coming out of the pandemic itself. It just seemed like things were. Well, certainly for one thing, there were so many people. I think seniors that probably should have been getting meals before COVID. They probably were on the fence about whether they should do it or not. And COVID pushed them gave them that
Mhm.
extra little push. So they started getting meals and realized, oh, it's not a peanut butter and jelly sandwich out of the church basement. This is good food.
Right.
And it's a connection with people, and they stayed on after COVID.
Yeah. Well,
For,
during COVID, every senior overnight became a homebound senior,
right.
right? I mean, the most independent of older adults couldn't leave their homes because none of us could leave our homes. And
It
so
wasn't
I
just the
think
seniors,
yeah,
but
it
yes.
was really a reality check
Hmm.
for all of us, right? But
Right.
the kind of the impetus for some people to say, hey, yeah, this is a way for me to stay in this home longer and to have a better quality of life. Yeah,
It
I mean,
just
it
seemed to
was
shine the light on a lot of things that were in the shadows.
it definitely did. And I think it also highlighted for me, certainly, just the need for us to stay really nimble and flexible,
Right.
because the days of knowing what's coming down the path ahead of hitting you like a Mack truck are gone. And so, it's changed the way I think about strategy and planning, and
Hmm.
what matters most. And yeah, it's a different world.
What would you tell, other folks in other Meals on Wheels programs? You talk about strategy and planning,
Yeah.
being nimble. What would be some of that advice you might give to somebody that's maybe starting another little program somewhere, or is feels like they're buried under a
Yeah,
pile of
I can
work?
I can understand that feeling. I mean, even in an organization like ours that has so many resources, right?
Hmm.
We've got professional paid staff, and we've got buildings and kitchens, and we've got all these things. It can feel overwhelming to me to think about the need. And when I start, and I'm always thinking out 5 to 10 years, right? Like I have a really hard time thinking about what's happening today. I'm
That's what staff are for,
I'm
right?
always out in the future. And so but sometimes when I think about it, I think, oh my gosh, how will we ever, how can we possibly meet that need? And I start really cranking on ideas and possibilities. Um, but I think what it comes back to in the now and in the present is, what are the needs in your local community right now?
Mhm.
What are the resources that you have at your disposal to respond to it? And then how can you build those relationships and those pipelines and those pathways to prepare for the future, but not get too rigid about how you execute on those ideas, right? So if you know you're going to need to be able to produce X number of meals or serve X number
Mhm.
of seniors because of population estimates, have a general framework for how to tackle that, but
Sure.
don't get too married to any one strategy because things are changing so quickly. And I also think, when it comes to innovation or trying new things, just being prepared to fail sometimes.
That's right.
um that it's a learning experience, and you take that from it and you move on, and that might be the thing that triggers the really great idea. And I think and I know it's true for all of us who lead nonprofit organizations, um we're so concerned with good stewardship, right?
Mhm.
Financial stewardship.
Mhm.
But these are really big problems that we're trying to solve. And so sometimes it's going to take a little bit of a creative approach, or a little bit of risk, calculated, smart,
For sure.
strategic, but
We'll do it smartly. But,
risk. Yeah. And if it doesn't go exactly according to plan, it's okay.
I bet out in San Francisco, there's a few people that realize what it's about to take a little risk here and there and an investment. And
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because the programs that were operating, Meals on Wheels, the Older Americans Act was authorized a really long time ago. The needs of seniors are growing and changing, and I think that's really some of the most important work that's happening at the national level is the advocacy around making sure that we're protecting that funding, and we're making sure that it's keeping up with the needs of seniors as they evolve.
for sure. Well, this is fantastic. If folks wanted to learn more about your program and the work you're doing, or maybe somebody out there wants to send you a check, where would be the best way to reach out to you?
So they can definitely come to our website, which is mowsf.org. And they can connect with me on LinkedIn, and send me a message on there. That's a really easy way. If they're in the network, they can find my email, I'm sure, through Member Central.
For sure. Here, I said a check. Like I've written a check in 15 years.
Yeah,
Anyway,
right.
showing my age. But
I still say that
yeah, I'm sure I will long before after banks are all gone. I'll still be saying it. When my son's sending
Hey, it
Bitcoin
still
to me.
works. We're happy to accept them. Yeah.
Exactly. No, right. Exactly. Well, this has been fantastic, and hopefully, I'm not. I will get a chance to see you in person, and maybe in San Antonio coming up at the Meals on
Yeah.
Wheels America conference. I haven't been in the last couple, so I'm looking forward to
Oh,
those.
definitely,
So,
definitely make sure that you make it. That's a can't miss,
oh,
for sure. And I'd love to see you there.
well, wonderful, wonderful. Again, thank you for this opportunity, for this time to learn about you and this program. I'm sure you're going to be flooded with questions and interest and checks. But and hopefully again we'll get a chance to do this again, at a later time and see what some of the changes have been on your
Yeah,
end.
yeah. I,
So
I I really appreciate you having me on, Dave. It's been a pleasure.
wonderful. Well, thank you. Okay.
Thanks.
That wraps up our episode. Thank you so much for listening. A big thank you to our guest, Jen Steele at San Francisco Meals on Wheels, for sharing her work with us. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing so you don't miss out on future conversations. You can also connect with us on Instagram, X, or Blue Sky, or visit our website at behindthemeal.com. If you have a Meals on Wheels program you'd like to see featured on Behind the Meal, drop us a message. Thank you again for listening, and keep up the incredible work.